Welcome to the Abolition Lessons here on the Schools Not Prisons podcast. There's no need to take an assigned seat. There will be no tests, no grades, and definitely no detention. The only thing we're asking for are open minds. Today we will be discussing the school to prison pipeline. Class is now in session. I'm your host, Irene Franco Rubio, and this is the Schools Not Prisons podcast.
You see here, kid, you gotta just go for it. You gotta just go for it. Go. Take a deep breath. Go.
Did you know that the United States spends more than $80 billion every year incarcerating people? We want to know why and learn about new ideas that can help us free our minds and our people with the help of folks who have their own stories of surviving incarceration, as well as activists working to hold these unjust systems accountable. At the end of each episode, we hope to be just one step closer to our collective liberation. Now that we're all warmed up, it's time for a little history lesson. Founded in 2016, Schools Not Prisons is part of a larger movement to examine the history of the prison industrial complex and how oppression in all its forms has worked to criminalize young Black and brown people across the United States. Historically, marginalized youth and communities of color are targeted and criminalized for merely existing, thus denying us the opportunity to pursue our dreams and attain our highest potential. By centering abolitionist education for young people of color, we're exploring alternatives to incarceration, centering accountability, and co-creating a better world together. Before we hear from our first guests, let's go over some vocabulary so we can really understand the story our guest is about to share with us. Our key terms and concepts to consider today are school to prison pipeline, prison industrial complex. According to the ACLU, the school-to-prison pipeline can be defined as a system in which children are funneled straight from public schools into juvenile and criminal justice systems. Many of these children would benefit from additional educational and counseling services, but instead, they are isolated, punished, and pushed out. The prison industrial complex is a term we use to describe the overlapping interest of government and carceral industries that sell surveillance, policing, and imprisonment as solutions to economic, social, and political problems. But we know the real truth of the prison industrial complex. In the words of the esteemed Angela Davis, prisons do not disappear social problems, they disappear human beings. Now that we've gone over some history and vocab, it's time for a story. Edgar is the Communications and Program Coordinator at MILPA, a movement space designed for and led by formerly incarcerated and system-impacted individuals committed to supporting next-generation leadership and infrastructure within communities. By centering cultural healing, racial equity, and love in their practices and advocacy, Edgar is focused on strengthening the movement to end mass incarceration.
Full name is Edgar Gutierrez. I grew up in this little town called Watsonville. The Ohlone people have different names for that area. It's called Calentaruk, Tayufta. All those different names mean something to that area, and it's important, especially during this time and throughout the year, to remember that language, to say those names so that we can continue their legacy on. But I grew up in that little town. My mom viene de Sonora. Her family viene de Sonora, but she grew up and was raised in Mexicali, Baja California. And we have ties to the Yoeme people, the Yaquis, out towards in Sonora. And then through my father's side, we have somos de Jalisco, de San Juan de los Lagos. We have deep ties to that land. I work for motivating individual leadership for public advancements, MILPA. Many of y'all have probably heard the word MILPA before. and think about corn automatically, but it was really a philosophy and an agricultural approach of farming, right? And it used la calabaza, los frijoles, but it really brings everything together. And just like we try to do in our communities of bringing a little bit of everything, right? Is to bring culture, consciousness, and movement building and continue to inspire, engage, motivate, organize, decolonize in every single possible way, how we interact with each other, but also how we challenge the system, but thinking most importantly about the future. What are we going to build?
I love that. Thank you, Edgar, for sharing. I love MILPA, and MILPA has been very integral to Schools Not Prisons since the beginning. And I am just really interested in hearing your story and how you were brought to the work at MILPA, and how, in large part, was that informed by your first interactions with the criminal justice system, if at all?
I came home in 2017. I paroled from Solano State Prison. And when I came home, it was one of those things, I didn't know what the heck to expect. I had just came out at 24. I left when I was like 14, 15 and came out when I was 24. After a period of almost 10 years of incarceration with a small mini vacation, I came home around 2013, paroled from Salinas Valley and came home, but went right back to what I call the messiness, right? But I came home, and one of my mentors, I had been writing him since I was a kid, since I was like 14. His name is Elias Gonzalez. I remember going to his office. He was working for this like work employment. So it's like, bro, I need a resume
Yeah.
and a cover letter, and I need some money for some clothes, right? Because I need an interview. And he's like, I sat down with him, and he's talking to me about this thing called MILPA. He brings up our executive director's name. Remember Juan Gomez? I'm like, oh yeah, I remember Juan Gomez. Juan Gomez used to go to the juvenile hall and talk to us about palabra and all this joven noble stuff that now I do, right? But back then I was, this was full of it, right? And it was interesting because he started talking to me about what MILPA was about and what they were trying to do. And it really reflected the mindset which I was coming from incarceration with, which was really, really tying back to our heritage, our culture, and our traditions. And for me, that was a big, big step because when being incarcerated and with my cellie, we would always talk about, sometimes people say like, oh, I got incarcerated and I got educated. I got incarcerated and I got a whole different set of values. So we usually all the time give credit to incarceration for quote unquote the opportunities we've had, education, values, all this other stuff. And throughout that, it's like, nah, they were always there.
Yeah.
Our moms, our grandmas, our grandparents, our uncles, our dads, whoever was in our life instilled something in us. It's just in this age of distractions, desmadre, it got misconstrued and it got lost. Experiencing incarceration as a young person, as an adult, seeing my father get incarcerated. My mother had her own interactions with law enforcement, deportation, what they call it, the scooter prison deportation pipeline. They tried to deport my mother as well. She ended up in the INS prison. So we've experienced it, right? Immediate family, secondary family, and beyond. And it was because I was just, I don't want to say normalize it or anything. People will come, oh, well, you guys andaban en mal paso, right? It's your fault. You made bad decisions. It's so easy to just blame the person without looking at the whole picture, because that's how education has taught us to think.
Yeah.
Look at the problem. Who's the problem? It's that person's decision making. But it's like there's really a whole environment adding it to it. Echándole leña al fuego, right?
Yeah.
So, but that's kind of how I get my start into all this stuff, right? It's been one hell of a journey to this moment. Not only did I have to go get education behind the walls, I got it in the streets, but now graduated from UC Davis in 2022.
Congrats.
I'm currently in my master's program at the University of San Francisco.
So exciting.
I'm trying to get my, what they call it, the professional communications degree, right? Whatever that means, right?
Yeah.
But it's something. It's a receipt that'll help me a little bit more along the way.
I really like that. In a lot of ways, you've identified how you are still on this journey of healing and have really centered the cultural practices, spirituality, community, and how that's really informed how you show up now. How did you, as a young person, feel that you were vulnerable to a system like the school-to-prison pipeline?
Dang, that's a lot right there, right? Growing up in Watsonville, the only thing that's really there is agriculture, right? Fresa. Yeah, you look at your strawberries you buy at Costco, it might say Watsonville, right? But that was primarily el trabajo que estaba present in that community. Everybody knows that the main 3 jobs in Watsonville, it's either you work in the fields, you work for government, or you work in the service industry, hotels, McDonald's, all that, right? or you commute all the way to San Jose, right, just to get a job. And so it's very narrow what you could do. My mom being undocumented, my father being incarcerated already put us at a disadvantage, right? And again, you got those folks that will lift yourself by your bootstraps. Man, we didn't even have boots. There was a lot of fear, and a lot of fear that was covered so that we wouldn't see it, right? But unknowingly, she knew that she couldn't show or provide an example that demonstrated quote unquote weakness, fear, right? So she's dealing with all that while we're also attending school. Throughout that time, we didn't have stable housing, first and foremost, which already puts us, everybody knows that if you don't have a good roof over your head or stable housing, it just makes education a little bit harder. We sometimes didn't have food, even though my mom did the best she could, to make sure we had food, or we got some food supply from the food bank, whatever. But we were showing up to school like that. En veces con hambre, but also having to walk across town to just get to school. And I'm talking about elementary. It's my sister, she's a year older than me and myself, walking, right? I'm talking about across town. And every time we showed up, and I still remember this, we would always get detention because we weren't on time. We were 20, 30 minutes late. And when in that process, right, no one ever seemed to ask us what's going on. It's just right automatically detention. And then they started putting us as quote unquote truant. So my mom got those calls. And in that process, pues, we had to change schools, right? So once again, and we changed schools continuously throughout. I'll say first grade all the way till sixth grade. Back jumping from school to school, not necessarily finishing a school year in the same school, probably attended 3 or 4, right? And again, it's because we couldn't have access. My mom, again, and I reference a lot of what my mom says, is she said, nadie me quería rentar porque era una mujer soltera, sin papeles y con 4 niños, right? So how are you going to make that happen, right? No one was really lending a hand. You had to wonder. I remember a teacher, really, and then she was actually one of the best teachers I've had in my whole thing. My 4th, 5th grade teacher, she was really concerned because I was getting into a lot of physical altercations, et cetera, and was getting me suspended, on the verge of getting expelled. And she ended up going to my house, right? She didn't know that we rentamos un cuarto in una house. So you have 4 kids and a parent in one room. Her eyes blew up, right? Like way. And it was one of those moments where it puts into perspective for another person, like, la chinga, what is to live in a situation, and what is to be black, brown, in poverty. I still remember in 3rd grade, I got into a fight and I me alteré, right? I got so just heated. I was so mad. I don't even know what I was mad about. The principal asked the school resource officer to calm me down, and the way to calm me down was to put me in cuffs. And I still remember sitting in the office in cuffs and just feeling like humiliated, but like I was so mad that I couldn't stop crying. And then I was just just feeling humiliated because everybody was like teachers and the folks at the office were just looking at me and snickering, right? Like, and probably my behavior at that time might have not been quote unquote the best because I was kind of going crazy too. And I'm like, that fool needs them cuffs, right? But at the end of the day, that's how they responded to a kid in need, to a child in need. Let's put this kid in cuffs. And I always ask myself later down the line when I was in a cell, sitting down and reflecting on life and everything that had happened, like, shit, would they have responded like that to their son, to their daughter? Would they have put them in cuffs, right? Was that the natural thing to do? To expose someone? The only time I've ever seen cuffs before that was on my father when I saw him in prison. That was the only other time. So to see that and experience that, I was like, oh shit, And again, these are reflections later down in my life, not necessarily in the moment. In the moment, I was a kid. Everything was about me. I couldn't see past my feet. I didn't understand the situation we were in. I didn't understand what poverty was, and I reference a lot of poverty because that's really what it is. You have a sickness called poverty and the different symptoms that show up is the school to prison pipeline, is mass incarceration. But we choose to neglect and not address what is where poverty stems from, this capitalistic white supremacist framework and mindset that we choose to either buy into or not. Sometimes we just being born into America, we're in a social contract, not by choice, just because we're born here, and we had to abide by that type of framework, right? So I say all that to say that that was kind of how I came into or experienced the school to prison pipeline firsthand. And those little experiences, right? And you know, I was getting suspended since I was in kindergarten, getting kicked out, you know, and it's unfortunate because I think about it. And my older sister was the one responsible for me, so she would get the lashings from my mom. ¿Por qué? ¿Por qué no lo cuidaste? Right? So, you know, I always think about just the actions, my actions now as an adult, of how they had an impact on my siblings and those around me, right? So, and this is just in the school setting, but in the community setting, because that plays so much of a role and part. We're talking about the late 90s, well, not like 95, 96, 7, 8, all that, right? In that area, we have NAFTA. So a lot of the jobs were already leaving. They were already leaving since the 80s, since the women's cannery strike in Watsonville. A lot of these folks, like, we don't want to pay them women all that. So we're going to send our jobs to Mexico or overseas, right? So there's also a vacuum of que no hay trabajo. And so what's the next best thing? Is incarcerate. So not only do we see the flow of drugs and all that come into place, but then we oversee the revamp and just a strategically organized approach to incarcerating men. Yeah. I'm not trying to justify people's actions and all that, but there was a system and a plan in place that strategically did take people out and left a whole vacuum, not just on the men's side, but on the mom's side as well. And all that happening in the community and coinciding with what's happening at school, you know, it's some folks can overcome it, quote unquote, bootstraps. They'll find some boots and they put them on. I don't know how that works, but majority of the folks that I saw went down that pathway of the school to prison pipeline. Some of us stayed longer in it. Some of us were able to escape on the first exit, but a lot of us stayed there.
Yeah, no, and I feel like there's a lot of minimal but also very grand experiences that happened, whether it was at home or at school. Do you feel like as you got older, you started to understand the ways in which systems were taking place on your life or in your community in the ways that you've described? Do you feel like that was something that you were like, I know something's happening here, I just don't know what exactly it is, or I don't have the language to define it, but did it feel like something was off or intentional at the same time?
You know, my big aha moment came, I was in Preston, and I was in the hole in Ironwood. And I remember it was, when you're in the hole, you don't have nothing. You got a Bible, a book, and that's it, right? Maybe your chanclas, your chanclas, your boxers, and a t-shirt. That's about it. But I remember walking up to my door and trying to look all the way down each hallway, right? It's north and south. And I looked, and I looked, and they and these places and these institutions, highly segregated, and they segregate you in that place by name tags. So pink tags, Hispanics, green tags, African Americans, and then the Hispanics, if it's north, south, demographic, geographics, all that, different tags, right? But one thing is for sure, I didn't see white tags, which is primarily white folks. I didn't see no white tags. The only thing I saw was the people who were looking after us, or not even looking after us, who were guarding us, or the correctional officers. They were primarily white, and from Amador County, Placer County, all these counties who, we already know what it is. You know, Placer County is Hangman's County. They got a noose for their county emblem, right? Amador County, all these counties are very, very, very conservative and white. That's for a fact. And these folks couldn't relate to us. And so at that moment when I saw that, I remember sitting down back on my cement slab, and I was like, just thinking to myself, like, damn, there's something here, right? And that's when I started picking up books. And one of the first few books that I picked up was Shadows of Tender Fury by Comandante Marcos.
Mhm.
And that book right there, and how he explained around NAFTA in 1994, y todos, the struggle, that whole struggle around the Zapatismo, Zapatista movement for national liberation
Mhm.
really resonated at that time, right? Oppressed
Mhm.
and the oppressor. You can identify that, right?
As you were in this journey of really, it sounds like political consciousness, right? Like you're engaging with text, you're like having the language to define what's happening to you. Do you feel like you encountered like a turning point where you realized in reflecting back on your youth, like if something would have been in place, things could have been different?
Towards the end of my stay there was about a $250,000 to incarcerate me. If my family would have got the resources for 1 year of my incarceration,
Mm.
we would have been way better off.
Mhm.
Way better off. You're talking about $250,000. I don't think my mom has ever seen that much money.
Yeah.
But that's what it costs for 1 year of incarceration. $250,000. That's way more than what it costs to send someone to one of the most prestigious schools in America.
Wow.
Just that notion that we're willing to pay way so much more to incarcerate someone to supporting that family, because that 250 wouldn't have just been for me.
Mhm.
It would have touched my brother, my sisters, my mom. It would have not only, and again, and as we already know,
Mhm.
it trickles out,
Yeah.
secondary family into the community. So not only are we looking at it from a perspective of supporting a family, but it's an economic support for the whole community. I just recently saw, my folks might not necessarily agree. BJ Penn said, why isn't that there is trees with fruit
Mm.
all over the place? So that no one has to steal an apple.
Right.
No one has to steal an orange. That they can just go in Mesoamerican days, right? And the Aztecas, the Purépechas, all the diferentes pueblos, when they had corn, lines of corn, the first 4 rows of corn were for the travelers so that you can have something to eat.
Mm.
It didn't matter. Why can't we operate under that same way? It's not because we're talking about money.
Mhm.
Brings me back to the whole thing. If my family would have got those $250,000,
Yeah.
man, just that one time.
Mhm.
And I did about 4.5 years in the youth authority.
Mhm.
That would have been a game changer.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I feel like it's totally framing this idea of what an abolitionist world is, like exactly what you're describing, like people having access to fruits on any tree, people not having to steal, just being able to be in real community together and not being torn apart by systems. And so I really appreciate you underlining this idea of poverty as like the main cause of really the outcomes that you're experiencing and a lot of people like you. I think poverty in itself is, right, the reason for crime or for so-called young people. They're being fed into a system when in reality it's no. It's like it's strategically placed and designed, right? Like for you to end up in that position. I'm hungry. I need to eat. I have to steal something, right? And so I really appreciate you just underlining this idea that people are not driven to crime as a way of life, but as a way of survival. How during your time while you were incarcerated, what kept you hopeful? Like, what was it that started to guide you and really encourage you to keep moving forward towards this abolitionist world that you're speaking of?
Literature. I always say being able to read and through the words and the passages of the different authors, throw my imagination,
Mm-hmm.
throw it out there. But that literature aspect of it supported so much. What couldn't, and like it gave me that opportunity. The best way I can say this is an escape, right? A lot of folks, is the cliche like, oh, literature, an escape. But it really did. When other folks were trying to fandangle some other stuff, I was trying to fandangle books
Mm-hmm.
because you could only have up to 5 books in your cell. It went from only having 2 at one moment to where it went from the California Youth Authority to DJJ, and they kind of started, and I throw air quotes, lessening the restrictions on what it meant, like what you could have in a cell if you're in the hole.
Mm.
So they gave us 3 more books, with one being the Bible, a huevo. It is what it is. The other 4 I always carried with me, and it's Shadows of Tender Fury, Dream Cultura by Jose Antonio Burciaga, ABCs of an Anarchist by Alexander Berkman, El Compañero is a biography on Che Guevara. Labyrinth of Solitude by Octavio Paz. And mind you,
Mm-hmm.
these books here, I'm 15, 16 trying to read this shit,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
trying to really understand what they're talking about. It took me months to just get through Dream Cultura.
Mm-hmm.
And the more books I felt, I don't know, it felt good. So that was one part. But the second part too was the articulation, the comprehension, the engaging in dialogue with my peers. That was important
Mm-hmm.
because it wasn't just me talking to myself,
Mm-hmm.
which was
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of crazy to just even mention. But it's like having an opportunity to share that book or just real quick write down the passage from the book. Hey, check this out.
Mm-hmm.
Trip out on that. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's your thought? What's your observation? So
Yeah. I think exactly what you're touching on with young people receiving access to a proper education. And I think within the experience of being incarcerated, you're already denied those privileges, really. I guess now in this American world, being able to read revolutionary literature is considered a privilege. How can grassroots movements position themselves to move us away from the culture of punishment that's imposed upon young people and towards a culture of prevention that could therefore, result in the outcomes that you've had now and being able to be on a pathway towards your own liberation and our collective freedom?
oh, yeah. California sits in a place where everyone's looking at them for reform, policy, cutting edge. It's actually going backwards.
Mm-hmm.
It's investing in a carceral system, not just from a prison system, but law enforcement and everything in between.
Yeah.
It's like that smash and grab investment. They're calling it organized crime.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't pay attention and be wary of the language that's being used,
Mm-hmm.
it's organized crime. When you see who's getting arrested, it's primarily young Black and brown kids.
Mm-hmm.
So now they're labeling that type of stuff as organized crime.
Mm.
It brings back this whole notion of a kind of the super predator, the gangs, and all these things. It brings all that back. It just looks a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
So this system is repositioning itself freaking well. They're thinking about their future.
Mm-hmm.
Just like we're thinking about community future and how to engage, the system is thinking about its future, how to become self-sustaining and self-reliant. So it's rebranding.
Mm.
In this process of rebranding, we had a carceral boom in the 80s to the 90s, late 70s to the 90s that resulted in 30-something prisons.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're looking at a rehabilitation boom.
Yeah.
While our communities are still in dilapidated conditions.
Yeah.
All these folks that will come back from prison will come back to dilapidated communities with little to no access to good jobs,
Mm-hmm.
little to no access to housing, and they're going to struggle. Anyway, so I bring it back just to get back on point around this whole notion of like, how do we get to a place of where prisons don't exist and abolition is a place? And again, it's like, it's going to take each and every one of us
Mm-hmm.
to tap back into that young child that wanted to be a dinosaur or an astronaut or
Mm-hmm.
something, that level of imagination and creativity to come up with solutions that are not for the present, but are for the future.
Yeah.
We got to think in terms of 30, 50, 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
We got to start developing institutions, structures, social structures, institutions that are beneficial for the people.
Mm-hmm.
If we continue to use the same systems in place, we'll continue to get the same result. Insanity is to continue to do the same thing over and over
Mm-hmm.
again and expect a different result. Yeah, that's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Engaging in the democratic process,
Yeah.
thinking that it's going to change something. It hasn't changed shit,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately. People will say the civil rights movement and all that, but that hasn't, again, from an economic perspective, there's no equality there. We know where all the wealth exists and is at
Mm-hmm.
as to compare to where it's not.
Mm-hmm.
We know where people feel safe and where people don't.
Yeah.
So it's like we got to look at this from a economic perspective, a legacy perspective, and really just think about the future.
Yeah.
Because that's where I believe it's really at.
Yeah. Well, all the gems here. That's amazing. I am left thinking about in the next 50 years, this system has already decided what it's going to look like. They've already placed a plan, have designed the system that's going to kind of replicate and continue to reproduce a system that does incarcerate. And I'm left thinking, if they've already established what's going to occur, are we behind? Are we not actively? I know we're organizing and engaging in movements, but now it's inspiring me to think about how can we really move at that pace, right? I'm really thinking about how we can push grassroots movements to work at that pace and work at that that understanding of what it means to be one step ahead, right? And I think we're always a few steps behind just because the systems are designed to make us feel that way.
They've already invested into that pace for generations. The most important thing we can do here now is solidify the movement through our relationship building. And when I say the movement, it's all the different efforts taking place.
Yeah.
Like, what does it mean to be in relationship? And I take it back to what my uncle was talking about, being relatives, right? What does that mean? It's messy. We all come with our own traumas and dramas. Yeah, man. And we project. Like, motherfucker, I know I do it. You know, all that stuff. And all that comes into play. And so there's a lot of different things taking place, but we need to be able to center the relationship of being in as considering ourselves relatives, because that part there, if I'm willing to be in a place where I feel that if your son is trespassed in some whatever form or way by anyone or anything or any system, that you know I'm going to go over there and advocate on their behalf just as hard as you would. And vice versa, right? That is what we need to do. We need to ground ourselves in that type of approach to movement building. Palabra en plática, of being able to have words with each other, of engaging in difficult dialogue consistently, not just once and done, but how we relate with one another and how we get down with one another is the most important thing. Because everybody has their own priorities, their own needs, their own wants, and it can get crazy because of that. And I'm not trying to say it's going to be all kumbaya and all that stuff. Again, I bring it back. It's going to be messy. But we got to do that earnest effort so that the next generation sees that regardless of what's happening, we're willing to talk about it. Platicando se arreglan las cosas, right? And that's important. We got to go back to that type of dicho, that type of saying, that by talking we can fix things.
Edgar, thanks for sharing all these key points on how the school to prison pipeline has directly affected you, how you've been on this journey towards liberation for yourself and for your people, and kind of bringing it all together. Can you share with us what abolition really means to you or what it looks like?
You know, the future is something that is ambiguous, it's uncertain, and it's scary. We have never been taught to think about it in that way. But from an abolitionist perspective, you know, radical imagination goes a long ways. Man, I don't even know. You can say unicorns. If you want unicorns there can be unicorns, but we can make it happen. You got to tap into that. And it's hard. It's scary. Pero uno solo está difícil, but all of us together, we can make it happen. So that's what it really means to me.
I hope that student listeners today are able to really understand what it means to be in pursuit of collective liberation through an abolitionist lens. And I think to me that means being able to understand how these systems are strategically designed and implemented to oppress us and to limit young people of color in particular from achieving their potential. Thank you for listening to the Schools Not Prisons podcast. The Schools Not Prisons podcast is produced by Revolve Impact, an award-winning social change creative agency and content studio, in partnership with Mordida Studios. This podcast is produced by me, Irene Franco Rubio, Akishian Wells, Mariela Rosario, and Mike De La Rocha.